Yield to my colleague here from Mississippi for some comments in this regard.
I appreciate what my friend has said about the drought, and much of my state at the last minute escaped it, but I happened to be in the state of Missouri in the past few days and saw the terrible drought conditions there. I can't think of a worse time with our farm community being devastated by this drought to talk about a huge tax increase on our agriculture community, particularly in the form of the estate tax. And I just learned a remarkable thing, and I would ask my colleagues if this is the state of the bill that we will now be voting on at 4 this afternoon. The result of this legislation would be to take the estate tax back up to 55% on all of the value of an estate over $1 million. This would be a devastating tax increase, and I honestly do not believe that the American people understand that this is the effect of the legislation that our friends from the majority side have brought forward. But if this bill is passed the way it is currently configured, that would be the result. We would go back to the old law, 55% tax on all the value of these southern and midwestern farms, of any small businesses across the country would go up. It would go up to 55% over values of $1 million. It's an unthinkable result, and I really, frankly, wouldn't be surprised if the phones across the street in our offices are ringing off the wall at this result. I'd ask my friend from South Dakota if I have misunderstood the effect of this legislation.
Mr. President, if I might respond to my colleague from Mississippi and from Indiana, Senator from Mississippi is absolutely right. The proposal that we will vote on is presented by the Democrats today, would allow the death tax exemption to go back down to $1 million. That's the pre-2001 level, and apply a 55% tax rate on top of that. Now, just to give you an example of how that might work in a state like mine, I represent South Dakota. The average size farm in my state's a little under 1,400 acres, and if you look at the average the value per acre of land and multiply it by the size of the average farm, you're talking about an average farm between $2 and $2.5 million in value. So you could be talking about, this is average. I mean, we got a lot of farms that would be impacted in a much more significant way than this, but you're talking about then subjecting about $1.5 million of that farm's value to a 55% tax rate. And 84% of the value of farm assets, according to USDA, is in real estate. So they're land rich but cash poor. So what happens? Well, when the IRS comes calling after someone passes away and says, well, your farm's worth this amount, we're going to assess a 55% tax, they say, we can't pay that. We don't have the cash. Yes, we have it in land. So what do? They sell the land. They sell assets. They sell equipment to pay the IRS. And here we are trying to promote intergenerational transfer of farms and ranches to keep family farming in this country as part of the backbone of our economy. And this is the absolute opposite of what we ought to be encouraging if we want to have policies that encourage family farms and ranches to stay in the family. So having a confiscatory tax like this that would apply a 55% tax to assets above $1 million is going to have a crushing impact on farms and ranches in my country, and I would submit to my colleague from Mississippi as well.
And if our friend from Indiana would continue to yield for just a moment, because this is his time and I don't want to intrude, this is also the same effect on mom and pops, on a family business, may have been in the family for generations. We're going to impose a 55% confiscatory tax. I am just speechless that this bill has now gotten to the point where it brings us back to the early punitive estate tax rates, which we've gotten away from.
Again, to my colleague from Mississippi and again on the senator from Indiana's time. But just to put this in perspective, the proposal in the Democrat bill, which would take the exemption back down to $1 million and raise the top rate to 55%, would apply to 24 times the numbers of farms and ranches as does current law. In other words, it increases by 24 times the number of family farms and ranches that would be impacted by the estate tax relative to where we are under current law. And as the senator from Mississippi pointed out, lots of mom and pop businesses, 13 times the number of small businesses would now be subject to the death tax, as is the case with current law. And so, you know, if you look at the impact of this, certainly in farm and ranch country, I see our colleague from Kansas, Senator Moran, is here, who also represents a lot of farmers and ranchers, very much like those in my state of South Dakota. This is profoundly impactful. I mean, this would have a dramatic impact, a completely adverse, be very, very negative impact on farm and ranch company, but I also would argue, as the senator from Mississippi pointed out, on a lot of mom and pop small businesses in this country.
Well, I thank my colleagues for joining in on this. They've made their points, and that I think outline the fact that many of us are stunned with a proposal that is being brought forward for a vote today to proceed on this bill, which incorporates a change in the tax law to impose a 55% tax if you die on all the work and all the profits and all the investment that you've made throughout your lifetime, which, by the way, you have paid taxes on over and over and over. Now, the government now just can never get enough. So the president is now proposing, and is being led here by the Democrats in the Senate, of raising the death tax from 35%, its current level, to 55%. And let me personalize this for just a moment. We have some very close friends who throughout generations have been handing the farm down from one generation to another. And they have suffered through the hard times, the droughts, the hailstorms, the tornadoes. They've also benefited from the good times. When the rains have come, the soil is good, and the yield is good. And yet right now they are suffering in a way that they haven't in more than half of a century, with this drought that just is unrelenting all across this country. And it takes in almost the entire farm belt of the Midwest and upper Midwest, where most of our grain and products are grown. And at a time like this, to bring forth a piece of legislation which basically says, well, not only are you being nailed by the weather, and we obviously can't do anything about that except to provide some basic form of financial help and relief to get through this particular time, and that's what I was talking about earlier. But we're going to nail you with a tax that when you die will basically prevent you from passing on your business or your farm to the next generation. And as I said, to personalize it, we have some dear friends, more than one couple, and I've talked to people throughout Indiana where the pride in holding their ground as part of their extended family, covering more than one and two generations, and the work that they have put in order to preserve that hand down to their children and then to their grandchildren, now goes up in flame, because when they die, they are now imposed, if their farm is valued at more than $1 million, a 55% tax on the value of everything over that $1 million. And people say, well, okay, they're millionaires. No, they're not millionaires. They are sitting on property that might be valued that. They might be losing money, and for sure this year they're going to lose money. They're not going to make any money this year because they've had to plow their corn under, because it hasn't gotten the rain and moisture that it needs, and it's not going to grow. And we don't know yet the extent of this disaster. And yet, to preserve that within the family and hope for better years to come, those won't happen, because they're going to, as the senator from North Dakota said, they're going to have to value their land. The IRS will value their land at a price which causes them, the only way in which they can pay for that is to sell their assets. Why in the world, at a time of an economic drift back into potentially recession, this country is not in good economic shape. Compared to Europe, we're in better shape, but if you look at the numbers, they're not trending the right way. And why at a time like this would you walk onto the floor of the United States Senate and put a bill up that it's going to raise taxes on people who are already suffering from 35% to 55%? How high does it have to go? How many taxes have to be imposed on the American people before they say, that's enough? Why don't you clean up your spending process back in Washington so we don't have to pay so much in taxes to cover all that you're doing there? I know my colleagues would like to continue to respond to this, and I want to turn to my friend and colleague.
If I could make one point, because I know my friend from Kansas wants to join in here. This could only hurt job creation among small business people and small farmers. And I can't imagine at a time, we've had 42 months of unemployment over 8%, the longest in peacetime within modern history. And to put this tax on farms that create jobs and small businesses that create jobs, which is where most of our new jobs come from, is just unthinkable. I can't imagine that it would do anything if it were signed into law, as the president wants to do, other than make that 8.2% unemployment rate go even higher.